please.
Okay, great. That's the cue to start. So welcome, everyone, to our next session on opinion pieces. So let me introduce myself. I'm Amar Siam. I'm joined by CAS co-founders Lydia Afriyie-Kraft and Imamdin Fohim. And we are also going to have some guest speakers today discussing along the theme of Africa's democratic trends in a global age of digital disruption, specifically titled Data Collection under the EUDR, that's the EU Deforestation Regulation, harmonizing transparency and data protection for environmental democracy. I think this is quite timely because, as I understand it, and I'm sure the speakers will cover this, this is something that's going to be enforced at the end of this year. In fact, I think it's been delayed. So we're looking forward to hear more about that, specifically in the context of course, Africa. Move on to the next. Yeah. I've got control. So I always like to go over this slide. This is just, especially for those who are just joining us today, just to remind everyone who we are. So we are the Centre for African Smart Public Value Governance, otherwise known as CASP. We've been running this centre now for a good 5 years. We basically conceived this around about 2020. All of us got together just to reunite and discuss what was happening. This was the height of the pandemic. We got over Zoom, much like this, just to discuss the responses. And this kind of turned into something where we would like to have more discussions about improving the quality of public governance approaches in Africa in general, kind of utilizing our kind of different skill sets that we have, different approaches and disciplines. So we're a mix of public management, international relations, and digital technology. So this is all melded into one center. We call it the African Smart Public Value Governance Center, with two kind of main intersecting aims. So we've got a practical aim. Obviously, want to contribute to the discussions on how to improve the quality of public governance approaches in Africa. And we do this by getting a lot of the experts to come on our platform to discuss this. We also have a theoretical aim where we'd like to also refine some of the theories and organization studies and public management from a non-Western viewpoint. So we do this by also having a number of courses, we write a number of papers and do research. And we try to get teams together to work on various projects. So one of our main kind of projects or I'd say our flagship products are the webinar series that we've been running now since 2021. So we started off with our kind of first set of series looking at defining what we meant by smart public value governance, defining what we meant by the African context. Then in 2022, we had academic workshops looking at fostering African knowledge creation. Then we had a change in 23. We had very similar to what we have today, a lecture series under the theme of rethinking smart public value creation from an African perspective. And just last year, we launched another series looking at administrative traditions in African countries. And then in fact, that included this year where we looked at various traditions across a number of African countries, Mauritius, Senegal, Ghana, Botswana. And you can go into find out all of these kind of webinars on our website, which is at cas.org. And if you go to /events, you will see all of these have been archived, all the videos for this. It's a good page to bookmark because you also be able to find out all the subsequent webinars and events that we're going to be hosting into the future. So I'd invite you to bookmark and follow us on especially looking at this page. So that brings us on today's session. So we're into opinion pieces. We're halfway there. We only have a few this year. We had a call out for opinion pieces under the theme of democratic trends in a global age of digital disruption, lessons from an African smart governance perspective. So this was launched about 5 months ago, and we had a number of submissions. And unfortunately, as much as we'd like to host everyone had something to say under various topics such as governance, data protection, digital rights, in the context of Africa. We could only pick a few. So we've had our first one, in fact, a few weeks back. You can follow that as well from our site. And today we're having our next set of speakers discussing on the EUDR. So I'm now going to pass it on to Adila, who's going to introduce us to the speakers and to the topic. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Amar, and a very warm welcome to everyone who are joining us for the first time for a CASP webinar series or who have been loyal attendees to our events. So thank you very much. And just to add as well, our series from previous years where we have collaborated and had contributions from various speakers. When we initially started, we have, as Amar mentioned, it resulted in research publications. And we have also worked with our speakers from previous years in order to collaborate on projects. So likewise, for this year, on the theme that we have selected, we are hoping to work with both our speakers and discussants on a project that we will discuss further in December during the final panel. So this week, it's the second webinar, part of a series that we are having, and we are very pleased to be discussing we are very keen to be discussing this topic about data collection under the EUDR, harmonizing transparency and data protection for environmental democracy. So this is a co-authored piece by Lydia, Astrid, and Thomas. And Lydia Afriyie-Kraft is a PhD candidate. She specializes in sustainable land systems impact area. She is based in the Center for Development and Environment at the University of Bern, and her area of professional focus at CDE is related to sustainable intra-African trade and or use of timber projects. And her professional interests are in EU Deforestation Regulation and EU supply chain legislation. And another co-author of the opinion piece for today, is Dr. Astrid Zabel. She is a senior research scientist and PhD holder at the University of Bern, specializing in development economics and environmental issues. She's also affiliated with the Center for Development and Environment, abbreviated to CDE, and works on projects focused on sustainable development, particularly in Africa and Laos. Her research has been published in various academic outlets and working papers, and specifically she focuses on sustainable land systems impact area and has published work on forest landscape planning and its financial consequences for landowners. Also, a third co-author for today's opinion piece is Professor Thomas Breu. He is the director of the Center for Development Environment based at the University of Bern, and he's a professor for sustainable development. In addition to leading the CDE, Professor Breu is executive director at the International Graduate School, abbreviated to IGS North-South, on global change, innovation and sustainable development, which currently has over 100 PhD students. And the academic background of Professor Breu is in geography and economics, and he has more than 25 years of experience in research and policy dialogue in developing countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, East Africa, and Central Asia. He has proven expertise, he has proven expertise in key themes of the 2030 agenda, in particular conceptual approaches to address synergies and trade-offs between the 17 CDGs. So we are very keen to have our three speakers. In addition, we have our discussant for today, who is Dr. Joseph Asunka. So Dr. Joseph Asunka has served as CEO of Afrobarometer since April 2021. He was previously program officer in the Global Development and Population Program at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, where he managed a portfolio of grants that support efforts to increase transparency and accountability in fiscal governance and foster citizen participation to improve public services in developing countries. And before joining Hewlett Foundation, Joseph Dr. Asunka was a lecturer in political science at the University of California, Los Angeles, where he taught courses on African politics, political economy of development, research methods, and data analysis. And prior to that, he was program officer at the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, which is a core partner of Afrobarometer. He served as data manager for Africa, for Afrobarometer prior to his PhD studies at UCLA. And Dr. Asunka has published extensively. And in addition, I am very pleased to be on the expert panel of Ibrahim Index of African Governance alongside with him and alongside with Professor Nick Cheeseman as well, who was our first discussant in a previous webinar we've had. So a very warm welcome to everyone, and a very warm thanks as well to our speakers and discussant for being present today. We look forward to the topic that is being discussed and to the discussion that we will have on the topic. On that note, I invite the co-authors. I don't know who will start first, but the screen is yours to share your PowerPoint.
Do you see something?
Yes, we do. Thank you, Lydia.
Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity to present our opinion on data requirements of the EU Deforestation Regulation, short EUDR, and how it can influence data protection of producers. My name is Lydia, and I'll be presenting on behalf of my co-authors. In this presentation, I will talk about the EUDR and its relevance for producing countries. Then I will highlight the complexities and challenges of the EUDR's transparency requirement and the emerging initiatives that harmonize transparency and data protection. And finally, I will suggest some actions to promote responsible data governance. I want us to begin with how the EUDR came about. So in 2020, the Food and Agriculture Organization estimated that 420 million hectares, or 10% of the world forest, have been lost between 1990 and 2020. The report further revealed a global annual rate of 10 million hectares of forest loss between 2015 and 2020. And through its imports, the EU is responsible for 10% of global land use related deforestation. So following the report, the EU commissioned an impact assessment which further revealed that consumption and production of agricultural commodities would continue to cause an annual forest loss of about 248,000 hectares by 2020 if no regulatory intervention is undertaken. And in order to reduce illegal logging, the EU had already introduced the EU timber regulation, that is the EUDR, in 2013. However, the EUDR focused only on timber and illegality, and there was no special attention on deforestation for agricultural commodity. So following the impact assessment, the EU developed the EU the EU Deforestation Regulation, and the EUDR entered into force in June 2023 and must be implemented by 30th December this year. It aims to prevent deforestation related, whether legal or illegal, and illegally produced agricultural and forestry commodities from entering the EU market. And it covers cattle, soil, oil palm, cocoa, coffee, rubber, and wood. Now we understand that the EU DR is an EU-based trade regulation. So why should it be of concern to the global south? And this is why. Article 9.
his perseverance and the quality of his research. I wish him a bright future. Knowing that,
Can you please mute on yours? Thank you. Go ahead, Lydia.
Yeah. Article 9 of the EUDR obliges EU importers to collect evidence that the commodities they intend to import into the EU market are deforestation-free and have been produced in accordance with the laws of the country of production. And most importantly, they need to provide geolocation of all plots of land where the commodity was or could have been produced. And EU importers must collect, assess, and keep this information for 5 years and make it available to the member states' competent authorities upon request. The regulation is very well intended as it strengthens transparency in supply chains and tries to promote or contribute to reducing global deforestation and biodiversity loss. But supply chains for the product covered by the EUDR are often complex and very diverse. For example, cocoa, when you use it to produce chocolate, may contain cocoa beans from different farms, regions, or even countries. Another problem is the variability of practices and regulations across countries and within industries, which makes standardization difficult. It is also important to acknowledge that producers of EUDR relevant commodities are often smallholders who might even be illiterate or have limited access to technology. Then again, the EUDR does not specify the exact documents needed to prove legality across different supply chains, which might leave room for misinterpretation of information needs. And actors often tend to request excessive amount of information, and this is a real issue under the EUDR. Now, the main challenge we see here is that the producers get pressure from their supply chain to pass on data to EU importers who need information for compliance. And through this, actors along the supply chain can get access to the data of producers and might use it One, downstream actors may find out about the sources of their suppliers to circumvent them. And this is also an issue that is encountered under the EUDR. Two, actors may use the EUDR as an argument to extract excessive data beyond the scope of the regulation to their advantage. For instance, they can ask for information to influence prices, although information about prices is not in the scope of the EUDR. Three, actors along the supply chain may manipulate compliant data and use it for non-compliant products. Since there is no way to check, unless you do laboratory analysis, there's no way to check whether the data is actually connecting to the product. And then four, actors may as well decide to sell the aggregated data. And based on the above scenarios, we say that fulfilling the EUDR's data requirement can, to some extent, invade privacy and violate data protection rights of producers. This raises the question, how is data protection regulated under the EUDR? As an example, during its international trade fair this year, the Kenyan government stressed the importance of complying with the deforestation, with the Data Protection Act 2019, and prohibited unauthorized entities from collecting coffee farmers' information under the pretext of helping them comply with the EUDR. But the question remains, are these laws and prohibitions really in real life enforced? The answer here is no, because according to Babalola 2023, data protection laws in Africa lack enforcement mechanisms. Now, on the EU level, the EU General Data Protection Regulation, that is the GDPR, protects the personal data of EU residents and those of non-EU residents once the data enters the EU. It also protects international transfer of personal data of EU residents. But the GDPR does not influence how third countries handle their data before it enters the EU. And this raises another question: who protects producers' data before it actually enters the EU? Now, the French National Commission on the French National Commission on Information Technology and Civil Liberties, that is the CNIL, has assessed the adequacy of global data protection laws. And adequacy in the context of the GDPR is the level of protection that is equivalent to that of the EU, which allows the transfer of personal data to that country without additional requirements. And based on the CNIL and the UN Commodity Trade Data 2023, which was published in 2024, only 16% of the value of EUDR relevant commodities come from countries who have adequate data protection laws. 10% come from countries with partially adequate data protection laws. And the rest of the EUDR commodities come from countries that might have data protection laws in place or even authorities enforcing these laws, but they are not deemed adequate by the CNIL. And according to the CNIL, no African country has adequate data protection laws. So we assume that countries without adequate data protection laws may be unable to protect the data of their producers. Now, if we narrow down to Africa, 51% of African countries have data protection laws and have appointed independent authorities to enforce these laws. 15% have laws, but no independent authorities for enforcement. 29% have no laws, and 5% have draft laws. And in our opinion, this represents a significant data protection gap. And the question still remains: who protects the data of producers from these countries? We cannot answer this question today, unfortunately, but we have identified emerging initiatives and platforms that seek to harmonize transparency and data protection. For example, the Team Europe initiative, or the EU has established the Team Europe initiative to support producer countries in their readiness for EUDR implementation. There are also other multilateral agencies and organizations who are developing platforms to support data collection for EUDR compliance. And to give a few examples, the International Trade Center has developed last year a deforestation-free trade gateway technology to track and report on supply chains without compromising privacy. It also gives back the ownership right of this data to producers. We can also talk of the Fraunhofer Institute for Material Flow and Logistics, who have also developed the Forest Guard. And the Forest Guard is an open source software which combines different technologies for EUDR compliance for the coffee supply chain in Peru. And then finally, we can talk of the Open Forest Ground app, or the Open Forest Ground app. This app is developed by the FAO, that is the Food and Agriculture Organization, and Google to enhance data collection and validation under the EUDR. Now, to bring our story to a close, transparency is imperative to effective implementation of the EUDR, because it can help to promote sustainable consumption in the EU and regulate the EU footprint to global deforestation. However, transparency requirements of the EUDR can potentially lead to violation of data protection rights of producers and data exploitation. In our opinion, producer countries should envision the EUDR as an opportunity for cooperation with the EU and take advantage of emerging technologies and initiatives to develop robust traceability systems, maintain data sovereignty, and enhance digital transparency and democratic participation. On this basis, we propose the following recommendations. In the short term, producer countries, in particular African countries, should invest in establishing robust traceability systems such as blockchain solutions, certification, and verification systems. They should also establish independent data protection authorities and build their capacity for enforcement. Then in the medium term, governments of producer countries should set strict rules to prevent potential data exploitation. For instance, they can find out about the minimum data required for EUDR compliance, raise producers' awareness about it, and try to enforce it. There should also be studies to analyze the various data protection laws in Africa, identify the gaps and effective ways to enforce them. And there should be the promotion of North-South collaborations to pool resources together, share best practices, and build capacities for robust data governance. And in the long term, governments should seek to establish and enforce data protection frameworks that align with modern data governance standards. They should also seek to foster cross-border cooperation and harmonize Pan-African data governance. And most importantly, African countries should see the EUDR as a point of departure for an urgent call to strengthen intra-African continental trade. So I want to say thank you very much for your attention, and please permit me to take this opportunity to invite you to a webinar and panel discussion series organized by the African Forest Forum as we identify ways to promote intra-Africa timber trade, which is very timely. And please scan the QR code and join the discussion, and also feel free to share it within your network. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you at the COP virtually.
Thank you very much, Lydia, for a very interesting presentation on a very timely topic as well, and for presenting the context as well about the data regulation and the gap and a question that you have identified, which of course you may not have immediate answers yet, but you have proposed some solutions as well, span over the short term, medium term, and long term. So on that note, we would like to invite Joseph as the discussant and to provide his views on your opinion piece and to ask questions for us to reflect on, for you to have your perspectives as well. And after that, we will invite questions from everyone else present today. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, Adelia, for this. And it's great to meet you. And thanks to the Center for African Smart Public Value Governance for this initiative, a really important initiative in that matter. I do think this particular piece brings out issues that are of importance, that needs greater attention, and especially for those of us who work within the data ecosystem, it is even more important. So thanks so much, Lydia, for the excellent presentation, and to your co-authors for putting together this piece. I must admit that you did teach me something very new, and I appreciate that. Reading through the paper, I appreciated all the points that you've raised in it. Certainly, of course, the EU's commitment to achieve climate neutrality by 2050 is an encouraging initiative, certainly. But driving the effort to get to that, to reach that climate neutrality, is an issue that needs greater attention. And I'm glad that your paper tries to highlight some of the issues that may emerge in the EU's commitment and their attempt to reach climate neutrality by 2050. Of course, just to think about it, to think that the children that are being born today can celebrate their 25th anniversary in a much cleaner and more sustainable world is something that is worth working for. And I think the EUDR does provide a framework to continue to start to facilitate that. And when I read this piece, what I took away from it is that it is an attempt to figure out the best ways that the EUDR can be implemented in an effective way to ensure that such a world will be possible, at least in the next 25 years. And so I do appreciate, and that is the one thing that I learned from this piece. Of course, the regulations are laudable, and as you rightly point out, the risks of implementing this regulation without a careful thought about how it might have implications on producers on the ground, and especially in countries where data protection is not as strong. I think it is a real concern, and I'm hoping that policymakers at the top level within the European Union will pay attention to some of these issues that you've raised. Of course, I know some people have written pieces about it already to some extent, but the nuance with which you come in this paper is particularly important. And I'm hoping that eventually this paper will find an outlet in a space that ensures that top policymakers have access to it and can draw from learn from the issues that you've raised here, but secondly, to think about some of the proposed solutions that you have in the paper. Of course, I do agree with you totally that having these stringent reporting requirements could result in excessive data collection, so exploitation.
Yeah.
Is somebody speaking? Sorry. All right. So data extraction, exploitation, and the unethical use of this data for other purposes, for private gain, especially for intermediaries and those along the production chain. There are people who might use this as a mechanism or at least an opportunity to extract excessive data, which first of all is just unethical that you're doing that. Secondly, if they can do this and sell the data for private benefit, it even creates bigger problems. And so the EUDR, even though you're thinking about climate neutrality and implementing this regulation in order to drive towards that objective of climate neutrality by 2050, what you leave behind in the process of doing that is worth paying attention to. And that's a good thing I like about this paper, that you are trampling on people's rights and actually undermining their ability to continue to stay within to produce whatever they are producing in order to reach a particular goal. And that can be even more destructive, because what is it that you are undermining in the process of getting to the outcome you look for? Of course, yes, the ethical issues is one. I know in the paper you've mentioned about costs. I did not hear about this on the presentation, or maybe I missed it, but I think that's also another big area. So costs to the producers in terms of their effort to meet these requirements, but also secondly, cost to consumers in general, because then as producers incur costs, they are more likely to pass it on to consumers, and then it ends up being the case that we're paying more for the products, and paying more for it not because of the good implementation of this regulation, but that some people within the production chain are manipulating the system for their own private gain. and then passing those costs on to consumers and also to the producers. So I do like the framing. I like the ideas behind this, and I like the way you have come up with the ethical issues that actually impacts individuals and especially producers. But I do have a few reflections and then maybe one proposal in terms of how you might strengthen this. First of all, I think it will be helpful. What I missed in this paper was, what is the type of data that the EUDR requires of producers? And is there a minimum set of requirements that is needed to comply? And is there anything beyond the minimum that people, depending on who the producer is? And I think you have mentioned the complexity of it, but it will be helpful to a reader to, especially readers who do not know anything about the EUDR, to just get a sense of the type of data that is required of the producers. So even if it is a footnote explaining these are the types or the groups of data or the types of data that the EUDR requires, that can be important. And it is important for the case that you make here, that people might exploit this data and either sell it or exploit this data to influence prices. It's, as a reader, if I don't know what the types of data are, I am really not able to link it to what you are saying the implications are, because you are drawing implications from the data that is collected, but I really don't know what data you're talking about. So how does the exploitation of the data lead to a manipulation of prices? And I can't make that link if I don't know what type of data is being collected. So I hope that you find a way to try to get at that. Like, what is it that you're starting from one place, the data exploitation, and you're talking about the implications of it, which is unethical use, potential to sell the data, or use the data to manipulate prices. And so some clarity about the types of data that is collected is important. The second piece is whether or not personal data is collected at all as part of this process, which is also directly linked to what I just said. Because in the paper itself, in section 2, you have the title reads as Uncertainty Surrounding the Protection of Personal Data. And because there was no mention of whether or not personal data is collected, it is not clear to me whether that is actually part of the EUDR requirements. But secondly, on that particular personal data issues, is what you mean by personal data. And so I do think you need to clarify that is personal data referring to the data of the individual producers or the institutions, what exactly is personal data? Because and then when I read personal data, I'm thinking about data about myself as a producer, whether it is my age, my national ID, things that relate to me. So if that kind of data is actually collected as part of the EUDR, you may have even a stronger case beyond the ethical consideration that there could be potential harm to individuals who are required to produce and to supply this data. But if the personal data is not collected, as I mentioned, then you may need to, of course, the emphasis is certainly on the unethical behavior, which you've highlighted in this presentation very clearly. And so that section 2 about personal data, you need to rethink it. Like, is it real personal data, the personal data of the individual producers, or it is something else that you are trying to refer to? The initiative that you outlined here, the 3 initiatives for the EUDR to ensure that compliance does not lead to unethical behavior, I think is very helpful, whether it is the Team Europe initiative, the International Trade Center's deforestation-free gateway technology, which is very useful, and the Forest Guard, you mentioned the Forest Guard project using blockchain. And I do think blockchain can be a useful tool for ensuring that, these issues about exploitation and selling of data and the unethical issue that surrounds the reporting requirements and the efforts to comply with the regulation can be very, very useful for that purpose. Of course, transparency along the value chain or the production chain is necessary to make sure that at least producers don't suffer the consequences of the unethical behavior of intermediaries along the production chain. Many of the recommendations you put here, the short, medium, and long-term recommendations, does sound great. I think the one concern for me for the medium-term recommendations is the challenge of the incentive structure that will motivate some of those recommendations, because even though we see them clearly as things that, if implemented, can work well to reduce this or eliminate this unethical behavior, the incentives that is needed around some of these recommendations to ensure compliance or at least enforcement can be challenging. And so as you think about recommendations, is there an incentive structure that can be built around it to ensure that there's enforcement of some of these recommendations? Otherwise, it can stand as a recommendation, but policymakers now need to figure out how to implement it. And if there's no incentive structure around it, either it is, carrots or sticks, a punishment or some kind of motivation to want to do it, it can just stand alone as that. And then maybe my final 2 points, first of all, about the issues of continental collaboration and coordination. I think that's a useful recommendation to make, and I think can even make it more forcefully, because across the African continent, as you rightly mentioned, data protection laws are very varied. Some countries have them in place and with relatively strong, others have only drafts, and others just don't have them at all. The question is, could there be a continental approach where you have coordination at the African Union level, where a minimum set of data protection regulations are adopted by African governments, and this is followed through and enforced? Because under the Africa peer review mechanism, some of the tools that are developed within the African Union is followed through via the peer review mechanism process that tries to keep governments accountable. And so having a recommendation around that kind of coordination, where there's a minimum set of data protection regulations at the continental level that is then implemented at the country level. And if we have civil society groups, advocates in this space who work with governments to enforce at least to promote the enforcement of some of these regulations, it can be very beneficial in that way, that you have a minimum set standard that must be met across the continent. And then countries, of course, can build on that if they want it even to take it further. So I think, that coordination, collaboration on the continental level that you recommend, you can probably add something like that to it. But finally, just to say a big thank you to you guys for highlighting this. I hope that this paper will find an outlet where we have a large number of readership, especially policy actors within the European Union, but also on the African continent, who pay attention to these issues. And for actors within the African context who work within the data ecosystem, to be mindful of this, to be aware of this, and to think more creatively about how some of the processes of wanting to reach climate neutrality by 2050 within the EU does not leave negative consequences on the African continent as a result. All right, so I'll stop here, and these are the comments I have. I'm happy to share these with you in writing. But thank you so much for educating me on this program. Back to you, Adila.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joseph, for a very thorough feedback, which I'm sure are going to give Lydia, Astrid, and Thomas a lot of food for thought. And Lydia, I know Astrid and Thomas, you've had a lot of information here. Any point you wish to address first, please go ahead.
May I start? Okay.
Yes, of course, go ahead, yes.
Yes, I will start. Thank you very much, Sir, for the inputs. They are very relevant, and I'm sure they will enrich the paper. And also, thank you for starting it from the bigger picture that is whether to start there, but we didn't want to make our story long, so we started a bit slow. But thank you very much. And to start with the first point about the minimum data required for EUDR. So first of all, producers need to provide coordinates or geolocation data to show the place or the possible places where the product might have come from. And they also need to give a proof of legal harvest in terms of timber or legal production, which includes tenure, whether they have ownership rights, and then proof that there's no that there is no modern slavery and all those international labor organization laws. And then they also need to prove that there's no deforestation. So we have the legality aspect, which is taking or following the principles of the EUDR, if someone has the background, the principles of the EUDR. And then the new aspect that were introduced are just the geocoordinates and then the proof of no deforestation. Now, coming back or connecting it to the manipulation of prices. Sometimes because the EU importers are scared of audit from the competent authorities, they tend to ask for more information than what is actually required. And as I also mentioned, there is no clear guidance as to exactly what information is needed. So they ask for more information, and producers also can sometimes give information like invoices. And invoices contains price. And of course, if you have invoice, you have geolocation and all, you can connect these to be able to locate to the farmer. So that is, for example, our first scenario where you could actually locate a farmer and circumvent your supplier. So these are the connection. Maybe I did not bring it out well in the 15 minutes presentation, but these are how they fit together. And regarding personal data, according to Babalola 2021, personal data is any information relating to an individual or an identifiable natural person, so not a company. And so the key aspect of personal data are first, it needs to be the identifiability. You need to be able to identify a person behind this, and reversibility. So you need to be able to follow up, given the information, you need to be able to follow up to locate a person. So for examples of personal data include names, photos, ID numbers, geolocation information, emails, biometric details, and of course, if you get a data where an invoice where the farmer's name, sometimes the address, or a producer's name and address, and this information, even sometimes pictures, then you are able to actually locate this person. Yes, and coming to the recommendation. Yes, I think it's very laudable to connect this intra-African cooperation with incentives. But unfortunately, I cannot think of any incentive idea right now. Maybe my co-authors may be able to. If not, then we will come back to that. Yes, and okay, I think that is all from my side. Maybe if anyone wants to add something.
Yes, Thomas, I don't know if you wanted to add. Yeah, Nick. I cannot hear you. I cannot hear Thomas at the moment.
Right now?
Yes, we can hear you, yes.
Thank you so much also for the pertinent question. And Lydia, great work. Really, I think what we have now in front is just, it looks small. The EUDR is heavily disputed, it's delayed, postponed, and let's see what is going to happen with it at all. But nobody reflected on the data issue. And it's not only about price setting. I see much even bigger risks in other domains than price setting, which is really possible through that kind of data and data connection. You know where a farm is actually. You know what is grown there. You know most likely also about the forest situation there, also about the land quality. You can get certain hints. That's extremely important and interesting information, namely also for let's call them neutral land investors, be it domestic ones or international ones. So it can really put vulnerable landowners at a higher risk if they are in the position to provide all this kind of data. So it can also lead to espionage. It could also lead to discrimination and so on. So it's really quite comprehensive. We open up the box of Pandora for unlawful and unethical behavior, namely when it comes also to smallholders, provided they are not already excluded by all these high requirements. So in this sense, we need to take quite a comprehensive perspective on this whole data issue. The market distortions which could happen and are likely to happen, by the way, it's another fact. Then the whole issue about the data compilation, it's also the feasibility. Can smaller producers afford that? It's quite technological driven. And if so, what is going to happen, as already discussed? And then you mentioned it, who is paying for that data collection? Is it really the consumer in Europe? I doubt. Because this market competition, will be played out most likely on the producer's back, so that they have to take over the large share of these additional costs, along with all the risks going along with this whole story. So, and in this sense, the incentive structures for the enforcement, I think it's an extremely pertinent question. Maybe the whole system of the EUDR is wrong, because it's just about forest protection, and it's not about ecosystem services in general. So farmers who do agroecological farming or sustainable farming, they are not paid for anything. They just have the costs. And there, I think, also when it comes to the EUDR, the incorporation of ecosystem service valuation, payment for that, inclusion in the price, in the European price market, would be important. And that there I could imagine through whatever kind of governance and policy measures, if properly done, that a certain share of funds for the enforcement could originate from. But given that this question is really so pertinent and all-embracing and needs a tremendous contextual knowledge, which Africa is such a huge and diverse continent, I'm a little bit hesitant to go further into that question, because I'm most likely totally unqualified to go into that. For me, just as a last point, I could imagine that the whole data collection and might be designated to a neutral body, which also is under strict ruling in terms of data protection, but also is funded by, actually, at the end of the day, by the European market participants, meaning the consumers, but also the retailers, whoever is in this whole value chain in. So there we are. Blockchain might be a possibility. It has a huge potential. It is clear. It has also its risk, as we know, and it's quite expensive. And just simple things. Blockchain technologies requires internet access, stable internet access. Do we have that, especially in rural areas and in Africa? So there are basically, yes, technologically it is a means, but there are a few restrictions to that, even going along. That also in blockchain technologies, especially the data or those who run the blockchain servers, they can get access to a certain degree to the data still. So sorry about maybe passing over to Astrid, who was quite important also in drawing up this paper besides of Lydia.
Sure, thank you so much. But I see Vadim has his hand up. Did you want to?
You can go ahead, Astrid.
Please go ahead first, yeah.
All right. So thank you so much, Elsa, for the very helpful and thoughtful comments on the manuscript. That's excellent, and we'll be very happy to take those points into account. Something I wanted to add on the price structure is all of this additional reporting requirement costs so much. And we've been thinking about who will bear the cost of that, and I think it will depend a lot on the elasticities of supply and demand in the market for the different commodities. So it's not so easy to say if it will be the producers or the consumers, but there's another risk, sort of, if it is the producers, let's say the smallholder producers, is if their price drops, there's some risks around substitutability of the different commodities. So, for example, in some regions of South America, we know that there were a lot of producers in the coca market, so illegal coca market, and it's taken a long time to bring them out of that and go into coffee. But now if the coffee price drops because of this additional administrative cost, they're very likely to swap back to something that may have a higher revenue. And so a lot of effort and work to get these people out of illegality will just be ruined in a way due to this additional cost here. So these are very serious risks that need to be taken into account and that maybe weren't considered sufficiently when developing all of this EUDR legislation. So that's one point I wanted to bring up. And the other one was that while developing further on this contribution, we've also been thinking about, well, could the data be sold in a beneficial way in between? Because now we've always been talking about the risks and that things will turn out bad. But I mean, if there is a consensus, if there's a real negotiation process and people agree on, well, we're ready to sell this data, it could be put to the market potentially in a good way also to provide more information on, I don't know, sustainability or whatnot. But we think that there needs to be a negotiation process. It needs to be somehow debated in the countries and then decided upon what they want to do with this data if it is sold. Thank you.
Thank you. And Emamdin, over to you. And then anyone else who would like to ask a question, please raise your virtual hand. Imamdin, over to you.
Thank you very much, first of all, to the speakers and the discussant for this insightful presentation and questions and feedback. It was several times mentioned, Thomas Breu, you said it's like you're opening the box of Pandora. So actually, I asked myself whether the kind of the government, the European Union's African governments actually are really aware of this problematic that you're raising, or isn't there really some awareness? And if there isn't awareness or not enough, are you also planning kind of some activities in order to raise this awareness?
We can take this question if you would like to address it. Any one of the speakers?
To be honest, I'm not in, at least in this aspect, I'm not close enough to the Commission, and yeah, I guess that the point is currently it's a little bit a strange situation with this EUDR. Basically, the overall notion that of the EU, or the motivation is I see basically as positive. However, now large companies in commodity trading and so on, they are not that happy with the EUDR. And they are somewhat more happy that there is a postponement or further weakening of the EUDR. So that is rather, and on the other hand, there are pushes that EUDR is made more farmer friendly, also smallholder friendly, and more just. And so, there is also a certain risk that the whole EUDR is abolished. And in that sense, I'm not all too sure, given that these large tensions or disputes are going on, that the whole data compliance or data sharing, selling, whatsoever, is at the forefront in the political debate. But I'm not close enough in this debate, but maybe my colleagues. We have some other scholars at CD working very much on the legal side of the EUDR. Maybe they would know more, but I cannot give you a meaningful answer on that. Sorry.
Thank you. Appreciate the answers. And if I have a question, anyone else would like to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand. And actually, it's more of a feedback. It's regarding the data that you cite from CNIL, the laws one. I wasn't familiar with it. I just did a quick Google research, and it's from French organization collecting the data about legal frameworks. And it helps you to substantiate the claim that there is a gap, and which therefore, informs your further recommendations or strengthen your argument that standardization and harmonization is needed. And I was just looking at perhaps other indicators that could help you with substantiating this claim of either a gap or not. And I highly recommend the Ibrahim Index of African Governance, namely their indicator about internet users' privacy protection. I do know that you're looking at farmers' data and so on, but internet users' data protection, and this indicator actually is assessing the extent to which there is a legal framework to protect internet users' privacy and their data. And in their latest 2024 report, they also show the trends, whether there had been improvements among African countries or a deterioration. So I included the link here in the chat box. Perhaps this may be useful to you, and perhaps that can strengthen or maybe show some discrepancies about whether actually there are it's the 28 that have the data that you presented, the number of countries that have it, no countries that do not have it. Maybe it can help you match the information, or perhaps if there are differences, worth questioning it. And also the trends that we see as well, it's about the improvements that could have taken place or not. Maybe that can help you have a more nuanced perspective about enhancement of data protection at the African level that have been happening. And of course, saying that it is not happening at an equal level among all countries, and why is that so, and so on. And going back to one of the feedback from Joe as well, it's about the collaboration and so on, and the point that you make about the African peer review mechanism, understanding perhaps the African Union's approach already or not, if it is missing, or if it is something only at a surface level, it would be relevant to include the perspectives and the data from these organizations. And I do believe from the Afrobarometer as well, maybe not specifically regarding farming per se, but regarding data protection or laws. Maybe Joe has a more in-depth knowledge about, but I know you have a wealth of information collected at the Afrobarometer. You could perhaps indicate maybe recent reports or recent data that you have collected. But APRM, Afrobarometer, and the Ibrahim Index of African Governance, I do believe if you include their data, that may strengthen your paper or the development of the discussions that we are hoping to continue with you as well. Yeah. Yes, this day, go ahead. Yeah, I think mine was more of a feedback than a question per se. Anyone else would like to add? Yes, Amar?
Yeah, got the old school hand up there. Yeah, thanks everyone. Really interesting insights. I've been really enlightened by it all. I just wanted to know more from if you could discuss more about we're discussing a lot of the data side of things, and obviously there's the solutions such as blockchain and the rest of it. But I'm trying to think of the scale of the amount of data that would have to be collected. Does that also include, obviously, to validate the plots, satellite data? Is that the responsibility of the plot owner as well? Do they have to collect that data on top of their location? Because I guess that would have to be also verified by third parties and the rest of it. So just thinking of the explosion of data, and then again, the issue would be then who is the one's going to have to manage it? You mentioned there's the free trade, deforestation free trade gateway. Is that a potential platform? But yeah, it just comes down to who's going to pay for all of this and manage all of this. And for the smallholders, are there going to be any other potential options for more affordable or kind of less digital approach? Well, I wouldn't say less digital. It has to be digital, but less, more accessible, should I say, for those who might not have access. As you say, blockchain, you have to have access to the internet as a minimum requirement. So that's the kind of things I was kind of wanting to know more about the data side of things. And even when it comes to blockchain, if you're looking at storing images, you're then have to think about off-chain storage, and the rest of it becomes quite a lot. Yeah, at the end of the day, yeah.
Yeah, so to address your question, first, thank you very much for the inputs that have come in so far. And to address the question, who pays? So the EUDR is, as I mentioned, a standard for EU traders of these EUDR relevant commodities. That means that EU importers are supposed to do due diligence to show compliance that the product they are importing or they are trying to place on the EU market is deforestation free, and it has been produced in accordance to the laws of the country of production. So that is their job. However, they try to push everything to the producers. and you want to continue to maintain market access with the EU. So what do? You try to also find this data or find every information you can get so that you can keep your markets. And yes, in terms I can make an example here in terms of cocoa. I read a recent paper published on cocoa production in Ghana, and they were saying that the Ghana Cocoa Board has taken up a huge amount of loan to train people to collect and map farmers' data for EUDR compliance. So these are some of the initiatives that are on ground. I can also talk, I mentioned it in my presentation, the Fraunhofer Institute. They are also working with coffee producers to map producers, they map them and then collect their data. So there are several initiatives that are coming up, but the responsibility rests with the EU importer.
And are they responsible for collecting their own satellite data, or they just rely on those? Obviously, you have to access it from somewhere, but as well as the location, or is it just the location they have to?
So they need to provide coordinates. So if the plot of land where the product is coming from is less than 4 hectares, then you need to provide a point, a coordinate. And if it's more than 4, according to the regulation, if it's more than 4 hectares, they need to provide a polygon.
Okay.
And,
yeah.
Yes, and this is what is expected of EU importers.
And then that'll be verified for someone else to look at the satellite image themselves. Okay. Yeah.
Exactly.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions or feedback for our speakers? No? And Mamdin, if you would like to share the slides. Yeah.
Yes, let me do that.
Yeah.
Just 1 minute. So I'm coming back to the slides.
But yeah, otherwise, a really, really great discussion that we are having. Even same as Joe mentioned earlier, I wasn't overly familiar with the topic. It's interesting to know about the EUDR framework and thinking about the gap that you are identifying as well in terms of the African context. As you mentioned as well, there are more case studies of the African context needed, and hopefully that is happening, or through your work as well, it would create more awareness about the gaps that should be considered in future research. But otherwise as well, I think in regards to our central theme about digital disruption and the implications for the African context and the democratic trends as well, there is a commonality that we have observed in our previous webinar, and this one is on the matter of transparency and accountability, even if it is coming from different sort of themes. These are items that we would like to explore, absolutely, and this is a very insightful discussion as well. As we mentioned, we will be discussing further, and Imamdin, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you're raising a good point, and I think when we think about democracy, we also have to think about the rule of law, and that was really critical in today's discussion. So I think to come back to the broader picture, it's about last time we looked at an important pillar, which was the media. This time we looked at the rule of law. So we are looking forward to the next presentation. So we're going to have a bit longer break this time. So the next presentation is going to be on the 8th of October this year, same time, 3 p.m. Central Africa time. It's a reflection on democratic trends in a global age of digital disruption. The speaker is Valentina Mentor from the University of Namibia. She's their master's student. I think she's also here with us today. So we're really looking forward to her presentation. And as this time, we're also going to have a discussant. It's Professor Chipo Dendere from the Wellesley College in the United States. I also saw her today in today's webinars. So we're really looking forward to that. We keep you updated in order to register as we used to do it. We're also going to send you the records from today. So we're going to write you, but for being updated about other activities, you can follow our LinkedIn page. We are also on X, Instagram, or you can check our homepage, www.casp.org. And any other question you might have, just write us an email. Here are our email is our email address, info@casp.org. So thank you very much again, everybody, for joining, for the speakers, for the discussant, as well as all the other participants. And I hope to see you next time. Have a nice morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Joe, Lydia, Astrid, Thomas. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.